Welcome to Lift the Gate with Business Resources, where we break down the barriers to growing your business with real, honest conversations. I'm Katie Santoro, and today we're diving into a question so many business owners wrestle with. What does it really cost to hire admin support? We're talking about the numbers, the hidden costs, the trade-offs between hiring in-house versus freelance versus offshore, and why so many business owners end up overwhelmed, burned out, or just plain stuck. If you've ever wondered whether it's time to get help or what kind of help makes the most sense, this episode is for you. So today we've got Bobby on. Bobby is part of our leadership team. She is our business development manager, and I thought she would be the perfect person to talk to about this today because we really spent a lot of time looking at the data and breaking down the numbers and making sure that our product or our service rather really fits what our clients need. So Bobby, I'm going to let you kind of do a little bit of intro about yourself, your background and how you came to work with Lyft and what your role is here.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you for having me, and
Yeah.
thank you for allowing me to chat about this topic. I think it's really important, and it's a little bit of insight into what we do on a day in, day out basis in supporting business owners. I myself have worked in various administrative capacities over the last 20 years. I started as a back office admin at a furniture store in Williamsburg, Virginia. And one of the things that I learned from that experience is it's not necessarily the big tasks that are the problem. It's all the little things down the line and organizing those and making sure that workflows operate seamlessly. And so I took that philosophy that I learned when I was 17 years old and I've applied it throughout my career. And one of the things that's really special about my relationship with Lyft and with Katie is we've known each other 15 years now. I don't want to age us, but we've worked together in the same fields and we've really developed deep expertise and a deep passion for helping businesses and helping them grow.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah. And when we brought you on at the when you kind of joined our leadership team at the beginning of this year, one of the reasons behind that was that we knew that you could talk to people about what they really needed. I think oftentimes executives and business owners aren't sure what they need from an admin perspective because they themselves are not admin experts. They are running their businesses, they're experts in their own fields, but not necessarily in the admin field. So part of our discovery process is always to tell them what they need, right? We know because we've spent years and years and years doing it. So we are able to kind of break down what they actually need when they don't even know themselves. Um, so all right, let's get into it. So there's a lot of data, there's a lot of numbers when it comes to what it really costs to hire an admin. But let's just start with let's talk about the different ways that you can bring on admin support. Anybody who has ever Googled the words virtual assistant gets 45 directed ads on their LinkedIn and their Facebook every single time they log in, right? Like it just comes at you nonstop. So there's a lot of different options out there, and we're going to break it down to really just like the four main ways. So keep it a little bit more high level.
Yeah,
But let's talk about, so we'll just go through them and we'll kind of talk about the pros and the cons.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the most traditional way is you go out and you hire somebody.
Yep,
They,
in-house.
they become an employee, they're on your payroll, they're, punching a time clock, you're paying for benefits, you have the tax burden as their employer, you're
Mhm.
also carrying all of the HR costs and things.
Yeah,
And so you have full control. They're your employee. You can hire and fire as you see fit, and that's really a big advantage. But you also have the higher costs of bearing that tax burden, bearing that training burden,
yeah,
bearing the burden of HR and compliance costs. And then you also have the burden of, well, if what if the employee doesn't work out? So there's potential that down the road, legal expense burden too. And
yeah.
so we see, you get more control, but you also face more risk as a business.
Yeah, and that's interesting when we talk about the full control. When you employ people, you can train them. You're expected to give them some kind of training, some kind of onboarding. And a lot of business owners now really cite that like that is one of their biggest slowdowns in getting admin support is the training them. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but just keeping in mind when you hire someone full-time in-house or even part-time as your own employee, you're also going to be paying those training fees and you're going to be spending a lot of your time getting them trained and onboarding them. So it's really a high cost. I think there's statistics everywhere, but we'd say about the $70,000 to $90,000 range per year. And it requires management. So that's just a thought with the in-house admin. Also, there's also something to say for being in-house, right? Like these admin jobs are usually a little bit lower paying. And doing it in-house, somebody might not want to take it if it means that they have to leave the house every day. So, we love virtual. So just keeping that in mind. What about freelance and part-time?
So the freelance world is really exploded. I think one of the things that's really great is there are a lot of options for freelancers out there. You have that option of taking on a project-based assignment. And there are, services like Upwork or Inch that are out there that are available to freelancers. Now, what you get with a freelancer is kind of a little bit of a buyer beware kind of situation. You have to interview them, you have to vet them, and you may not get the same quality or have the same control over the work that they do. I mean, beyond being able to leave a review at the end of the day and saying, look, maybe my project didn't come out as I'd hoped, or this project was great, you really have very limited control over those freelancers. Now, those are great though for people who just need, I've got this spreadsheet I need to have sorted out. I've
Right.
got, I need somebody who's just an Excel expert to help me move things around. And
Mhm.
those are great options for businesses who are looking to be cost effective for those very limited ad hoc project-based pieces.
Yeah.
But again, it's very, very careful. You have to be very careful about what's in the market, and you have to be very careful about your interview process. And so there's a lot of lift in sort of delegating that freelance option.
Yeah. And your freelancer is always going to be looking for the next gig.
Exactly,
Yeah, they're
exactly,
they're always going to
exactly.
be looking for something that is going to pay more, or maybe that is a little bit more stable. So you don't get the same reliability and consistency. Um, and you can't, if you're hiring a freelancer on a place like Upwork, you can read some of their past reviews, but there's not a lot of vetting you can do. You can't, you're usually not getting their resume, you're not checking on their references. And because it is kind of that freelance, like quick solution, it's people who don't often have a lot of experience. I can't tell you how many people we've heard say, oh, well, I'm just going to be a VA and, I'm just going to work from home with zero admin experience. This is just a job I'm going to do. And we really don't think that the admin job is an unskilled job at all. I think it requires a lot of skill, a lot of experience, and a lot of support because things change so quickly. So just remember, when you hire freelance, they're going to be looking for other roles. They might not have any experience. They might be very inexperienced. You can't really vet them, and they don't have the support behind them. If you yourself do not have a strong admin process, your freelancer won't have anything to work from, and they won't have the support to build that process. So that's a thought there. But again, there's nothing wrong with it. I started as a freelancer, but I also started with 20 years of experience. Um,
Well, exactly. And sometimes you're going to get freelancers who are highly experienced and who are highly vetted. And,
Yep.
we're definitely not down on freelancers. Some of our greatest folks on our team came from that freelance space.
Yep.
And some of my networking connections do some freelance work on the side as a supplement to helping them build their dreams. And so, we're definitely not concerned that freelancers are a big problem, as it
Mhm.
were. We're concerned that you don't maybe always get what's as advertised, and
Right.
and it's hard to measure your quality control standards against something that's unmeasured
Yeah.
and unmeasurable.
I think it's safe to say there's a time and place for a freelancer,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
but it's not always the time and place. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And
Well,
so let's talk about the option that I think a lot of people feel very attracted to, which
yeah.
is offshore.
Mhm.
And I think the thing that's great for businesses is it's a very cost-effective method.
Right, but you get what you pay for.
But you get what you pay for. And unfortunately, one of the things that we find in a lot of the offshore operations that we've seen, and from clients who come from an offshore to an onshore VA, is they didn't like the language barrier, or the tone. They had inconsistent ability to have contact. It was really hard to track tasks. The accountability piece was difficult. But, the thing that worries me is, you want to make sure that the people that you're working with are treated well. And we have no measure of doing that, outside of the United States.
Yeah, most countries will have a minimum wage, but whether or not that is enforced is a whole different question. You see that in countries like India. Also, the offshore, Bobby, we met someone the other day and we met her out we were at an event and we were talking about what we do. And she literally started crying because she was so overwhelmed. She was working with 3 different offshore VAs. So she had hired 3 people to do the job of 1 person. There was communication errors. She could never get in touch with them. It sounded to me like the person that she was assigned from, I think she was with an agency, was probably working on, 10 different clients and just wasn't getting to what she was supposed to do because there is not that same level. Like the way that we do it is it's very time blocked and you get those hours. Whereas we see with a lot of the offshore VA firms and sometimes, onshore VA firms is that they're assigning one assistant 60 hours of work and telling them to do it in 30. And so you get really bad, you get really bad communication, you get really bad work product. If you are paying $15 an hour, you're going to get what you pay for. But again, it's a lot like the freelance portion. Like there is a time and place, like you might want to offshore just a very specific, like you need, you want to work with ClickUp and you want to hire a ClickUp expert and you just need your ClickUp boards created. Like offshore, great for that. But that longer term executive assistant role doesn't always work in the offshore context because you do need that daily communication within work hours, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, the last way is the way that we do it at Lyft, which is, we're a managed agency. Now, what does that mean? People hear fractional and they hear managed agency and they're like, "Oh, what does it mean? Do you have contractors?" No, we don't outsource. We have all of our assistants are our employees, and that allows us to provide training. It allows us to provide mentorship. It allows us to provide benefits, paid time off. And so, we're really hiring folks for the long term and to be a long-term partner with our executive assistants and with our clients because
Yeah.
we don't want, to cycle in and out of clients. We want to cycle in and we want somebody who really becomes part of your strategy, part of your business plan. And part of that business plan being your ability to get more done in that fractional space.
And I think it's important when we talk about a managed VA agency, the reason that we are able to manage people is because we employ them. We don't contract them. A lot of agencies do contract. I don't know many that have an employment model like we do. And we did that so that we could have a little bit more control. You have to be careful, you want to talk with HR and talk with your lawyer, but when you hire a contractor, there's things you can't do. There's definitely like a level of management you cannot give. You can't, train them. They should be fully trained. You can't ask them to work certain hours. It depends on states. And again, like talk to your HR and your lawyer. But if they're not employed, if they're just contracted, there's not that same level of control and it could get you into a little bit of a sticky situation. Which is, one of the reasons why we chose an employment model so that we can ask them to show up on time and, go through specific trainings and all those good things without crossing that contractor employee line. Okay, so you mentioned fractional and people never understand what we're talking about. When we're like, oh, we're fractional. They're like, well, what the heck does that mean? So let's kind of break down what that means.
No, most popular question at every networking event is,
Mhm.
what do you mean by fractional?
Yeah.
What do
Except from people who are fractional.
except for people who live in this space, which
Yeah.
which we love, and we love that it's a growing industry. So anybody who's fractional is somebody who comes in as a contractor and who works a specific part-time fraction of that work week. And what does that fraction look like? Well, that fraction could look like a number of things. It could look like 10 hours a week spread over 2-hour time blocks. It could look like 20 hours a week spread over, 5 4-hour time blocks. Or it could look like an ad hoc situation where we're working 5 hours a week for a project, where we break it into 2 hours and 3 hours, or 2.5 and 2.5. Now, what does that get me? Is always the next question. Like, where does that fractional space benefit me? And so what we tell people, and what we see is it gets you dedicated time.
Yep.
It's dedicated time where your assistant is sitting in front of their computer screen solely devoted to your work. Now, I think about when I went into an office, I used to sit at a desk and I would get my head down and I'd start working on a project, and someone would knock at my door.
It was me.
And
Someone would pop over the side of the cube and start a conversation.
yep,
We worked together and we eventually got separated. We were no longer allowed to sit next to each other.
yeah, we were too much trouble. We were too much fun. We had snacks. We had laughs. We found
Right. But what we weren't doing was working 40 hours a week. You know, we were in the office, but there's that time where you're at the water cooler, you're stopping or talking to somebody, or you know, getting pulled into a meeting. Like, all of those things take up a lot of time. I do want to point out real quick also with the fractional, and I think this is often where it gets a little confused. Like, fractional isn't just like an unskilled part-time worker. Fractional is usually like with a specialized expertise. And we do very strongly believe that an executive assistant is a specialized expertise. You can bring in people with less specialized expertise for lower level admin roles. And I think that could also kind of fill in that fractional, because it's still a part-time or project base. But really, when we talk fractional, we're talking about bringing someone in who already has the expertise and can really hit the ground running to help you move your projects forward.
Yeah, and I think about, when you have certain pieces and times in your life when you need an expert in a specific area.
Mhm.
And we think about it when we go to a surgeon, or go to, have any sort of specialized medical procedure. You're not just going to hire somebody who's a generalist. You're going
Right.
to hire somebody who has that special expertise in that area. And so that's what we really try to hone to and speak to. I mean, whether you're a CEO and a founder, and you need somebody who's going to help you scale as a business, help you grow, we try to find somebody who's got that specific expertise, not just somebody who has a very general admin experience and maybe, answered phones and didn't really do any of that strategic partnership or filing or, different things. So again, I think of us more like a surgeon. We're coming in with a very specific expertise.
Yeah. And with that being said, an admin, kind of your general support admin, they may have specific skills that are going to grow into that executive admin position. And we look at that as well, right? Like, if you have one very specific program you work on and they have experience in that, and we know that they have the ability to learn and to be strategic with you, we match on that as well. Okay, so fractional is really that specialized part-time or project-based support. I think that's a good way to explain it, right?
Exactly, exactly. And the other thing I want to say about expertise, and I think this sometimes gets missed in the business development space, is I work as an executive assistant on a fractional basis in addition to my business development role. And the reason I think that is such a good thing is I understand the space. I understand what our clients' needs are because I'm working directly with a client.
Right. And for that matter, me and our COO, Megan, we both did that. I started as a freelancer, really honed in on like what it was that clients wanted from me, and how, I could help provide that through myself and through people that we hired. And Megan did the same. We both worked probably about 2 years on client work. I gave it up 2 years ago. Megan gave it up a year ago. So that we could continue to scale the business. And then we got our own assistants. So we definitely like kind of grew with that. And we work with assistants. So we went from being assistants to working with our own assistants. And we really see like both sides of it. So we're not just, coming in as investors who want to make the most out of the business. Like, we are doing this because we know what is behind it and how to make it work. And we know that we can make a difference with it.
Well, absolutely. It's definitely a passion project.
Yeah.
From
Well, also,
experience.
we've got to work too and pay our bills, right?
Well, exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the numbers. So when we talk about like base salary, there's a lot of things you have to look at. And one of them is location. and skill set and all those things. So we're going to give you a really big range. It feels like a really big range to me, but what we typically see is about 45,000 to 65,000 for an executive assistant. Now, that base salary, if you're in somewhere like New York, you're looking at 75 to 100,000. Like, it could change depending on where you are. So one of the benefits, I think, of working remotely is that you can hire people who have a lot of skills from different areas where the base salary might be a little bit lower, and get, a higher bang for your buck, essentially. But let's talk about, so the base is 45 to 65. What does that look like, Bobby, when you've done a lot of research on this, when you actually break it down into that cost?
Well, when you actually break it down in that cost, there are a lot of things that business owners don't think about. And it's things like your brick and mortar. Okay, how much does it cost to have that seat in that office building? How much does it cost for the desk, the computer, all of the computer equipment, the bandwidth, the appropriate internet program, the printer that will keep jamming, that sort of thing. It's
Time
those.
at the printer trying to unjam it. That's
E-
another.
e- Exactly. And so there's the physical cost, and then you've got to tack in your employer's costs. So
Mhm.
you have your employment taxes, you have your state, your FICA. You also have all of the costs of training, the cost of HR,
Mhm.
the costs of providing benefits. I
Mhm.
mean, looking at a base salary in that 45 to $50,000 range, you're going to be putting up a match on a simple IRA of at least $1,500 a year.
Mhm.
And
Uh,
so all that adds up to be a $70,000 to $90,000 benefits package.
yep. There's also, God, just the management side of it. Like, I'm thinking about workers' comp, right? You pay workers' comp on an admin role, it's not very high. But I will tell you, every year you're going to get audited, and you're going to spend weeks going back and forth with your insurance company on that audit. If you are providing benefits, it's the amount of time of, that has to be reviewed every year. There's a really deep cost analysis with benefits because they get expensive. They go up. I think last year we saw it 9% in healthcare. And that's going to happen every year. So, when you hire someone, you think, oh, I've got this all set. Remember that some of those things happen again, year over year, every year. So they might be really, really trained really well after the first year, but then you've got all these other ongoing costs of employment that they really add up with your time and with your money. Okay. So we know that base salary, 45 to 65, total cost, and we have a sheet that we can break it down if you're interested, and we can provide that. But it's 70 to 90 a year, about is what we say is total out of pocket for the employer for a full-time role. So let's talk about what freelancers are typically paid.
So we see a range. I mean, it's definitely a range too, and it's dependent a lot on skill.
Yep.
We see 25 to 45 an hour. And with a freelancer, you're entering into essentially a contract arrangement. And so that hourly wage is getting passed on to them in the form of pre-tax income. So they end up with the tax burden, which is something that I think sometimes gets missed with freelancers.
Mhm.
And that cost is, again, it's you get what you pay for. We all try to strike a balance between, and I use this analogy a lot, but I don't think Katie's tired of it yet. But it's the triangle of good, fast, and cost effective. And you can have things that are good and fast, but they won't be cost effective. You can
Right.
have things that are um, cost effective and fast, but they won't be good. So
Right.
it's, all business owners really have to balance those things before making a good decision.
Yeah. And one of the things about the lower end of working with freelancers, if they are not, if they're a newer freelancer, and we often say, like, don't hire your neighbor sister's dog walker
Yeah.
for a variety of reasons. But one of those reasons is they might say, hey, I'll take $20 an hour because I want to get started, and you pay them that, and then they get a 30% tax burden. And when it comes to the tax bill at the end of the year, they sit down, if they have a spouse, and this is one of the reasons why we moved to an employment model. But if they have a spouse and they're sitting down and they're doing their taxes, the spouse is going to say, we're paying taxes at the end of the year that make it not worth you to not be in the house, right? To not be, to
Yeah.
to remove yourself from the household duties, the child rearing duties, the duties of taking care of family members, it's not worth it for us to have a tax bill at the end of the year. So you have to keep that in mind. And when people are like, oh, I want to pay my assistant, $20 an hour, I'm like, is that going to be enough to get them to come into work and do the job? Because in a lot of cases, it's not. Like, you've got to pay people what it's worth for them to actually be in the workforce. And because we don't only hire women, we hire men as well. But this is the executive assistant and the admin assistant field are very strongly women based. It is just more of a woman's role. I think it's because of our organization, but there's many different reasons. And one of them is that it can be, especially virtually, a good way for women to work while still taking care of their families. So you have to make it worthwhile for them to take that time away from their families to work.
Exactly.
That's just my soapbox.
No, and I know, and it's a little bit of my soapbox as well. As a woman who has kids and that are in, school, they're in sports, they're doing all of these things. We live in a world of increasing costs. Everybody knows that. And unfortunately, like, this is where we are. We have to kind of adjust for those costs. And one of the things that we're really, really concerned with is making sure that we're compensating folks fairly and appropriately and not passing on a tax burden to them that they then have to, stomach at the end of the year. Nobody likes surprises, especially when it comes to taxes.
Yeah. I have a lot of feelings on this. But we hear a lot, nobody wants to work anymore. People want to work. Trust me, it is. Most people have a drive to work and do something meaningful for their time. People don't want to work for minimum wage and have to drive into an office and have to work additional hours and give up all of their free time for a crappy paying job. So we're also very like, we have boundaries, right? Like, you pay this much for your person's time and you get the most efficient work out of their time. But then when their time block is over, they're going to go home and live their lives and do a really good job doing the things that aren't working, right? So all right, so that's a tangent, and I could talk about that for hours. I feel
I know we definitely could.
but let's talk about the offshore VAs. What do we see their pricing? I mean, I get ads every day, $7, and it's the same stock image used by all the different overshore companies. Just to be really clear, a lot of these overshore companies are run by like private equity or tech companies. Like, they are not people who understand what actual admin assistance is. Also, be very wary of the companies that require their assistants to pay for their training program to get certified. There is no certification for an executive assistant or an admin assistant. It's just, there's no governing body to certify anything. So when when they have these programs that they have to pay for, and we see it with agencies in the States too, just keep in mind that it's taking advantage of the system on both sides. But yeah, all right, Philippines, India, what are we paying over there?
So I've seen a range. I've also talked to some of the offshore folks. And I think there are some that are really trying to do well in their world and make a difference.
Mhm.
But doing well is still not necessarily doing the best service possible,
Mhm.
right? Because what is happening is you have some folks that are educated, but they're educated in their system. And you want to be able to provide people who are educated in your system and educated in your country and who, you've invested in and companies have invested in. You want to be able to provide them resources. And so unfortunately, what ends up happening is that really depresses wages and it depresses the standards that are there and the expectations. And so again, time and a place for offshore options. I did talk with a company that was, I thought, impressive, but they were impressive for a specific skill set. And it's not a skill set that we offer at Lyft Business Resources. It was, call center based.
Yep,
Um,
that's
and
a great
and
example
that's
of.
and that's a great example. And they were paying, way better than the prevailing wage for that country. But at the same time, it was a number that, is a lot lower than what anyone here would have expected to pay reasonably.
Yeah, well, the problem, and we don't do any call center work, because essentially the problem with that is somebody has to be paid for all of their time, right? So if they're there to answer your phones for 8 hours a day, they need to be paid for those 8 hours a day
Exactly.
to sit there and answer your phones. So you do, if that's all their role is, then a call center is a great option. And we see, I mean, everybody can, my first thought is QuickBooks. Like everybody knows a company that offshores that call center option. And I think it is a cost effective option, which is why we see it. There's also, like web development,
Mhm.
some IT stuff. Like there's a lot of stuff that just makes sense to kind of offshore because it is so hour intensive. Well, it's still low labor intensive. So here's the statistic, that 35% of small business owners were dissatisfied with their offshore VAs. So that's not everyone. So there's clearly a space where it works really well for people. But there is, if you really need that like next level high touch support, you're probably going to want to keep it in the States in the same time zone with the same cultural context, better communication, all those good things. So let's talk about what are you really paying for in that $25 to $45 an hour? What are you getting for that?
So I think you're getting quite a lot, especially with us at Lyft. One of the things that I think is so special about our team is that we are very much a group, and a group in the sense that we've got a pretty deep tech stack, and there's always a way for us to learn things. So I'll give you an example. When I started as an EA with my client, there was something that I didn't know, and I didn't know how to use the specific software. And so I reached out to somebody on the
If there's anything you don't know, Bobby.
team. This was one that I didn't know. I'd never seen it before. I was sure I could figure it out.
Mhm.
I approach everything as a solvable problem. Like everything that is a problem is solvable, is fixable. This was something I was just in the wilderness about.
Mhm.
And I picked up the phone. I connected with someone on our team. We talked for 20 minutes. I walked away. I felt great. I felt reassured. And I felt like I had my feet on the ground before I sat in front of my client and presented how this application could benefit her business. And it does. And it
Yeah. And we talked about that earlier, with your freelancer, if they don't have support, if they don't have someone that they can go to figure out how to do these things, you're going to pay for that time of them figuring it out and learning on their own. Or they're just not going to learn it. They're going to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do this. It's outside of my skill set. And then you're not going to have a fully rounded skill set in your assistant. That's one of my favorite things about our team. And that really came from, you know, one of my first jobs was as a legal admin, and like the attorney couldn't teach you how to be a legal admin. That wasn't the attorney's job. It had never been the attorney's job. The attorney went to law school and learned how to be a lawyer, not to be an admin.
Mm.
So you didn't learn from the attorney what to do. You learned from the legal assistant who sat next to you, who had been there for 20 years, who could, you know, send a fax, because back then we had actual fax machines, like send a fax while being on the phone with the clerk and scheduling a hearing, and also mailing out 45 envelopes all at the same time. Like this woman could do it all. And that's who you went to.
Yep.
And for us, that's why we created our mentorship. Like you need to be able to go to somebody with questions, and that somebody should not always be the business owner, because the business owner, again, their specialty is not admin. And executives, their specialty is not admin. Bobby, how much time, we've done the research on it, how much time do business owners and executives spend on admin?
I've heard people say, like, that's half my day. My day is absolutely gone with just the admin tasks. And I've had people say, "Oh, it's 30, 35%." And then you talk to those folks a little bit more and you do a little bit of a deep dive about how much time they're spending, you know, working on the work itself.
Mhm.
It's a lot more. It's meetings, it's those, quick interruptions.
Mhm.
And, while absolutely those are part of the business, right?
Yeah.
Business owners all take incredible risks and have to be incredibly brave every day.
Mhm.
Here's a way to take that. Okay, you've got this slate of tasks. You know that they're repeatable. You know that they're definable. Let's take them off your plate. Let's have you not think about them.
Or very time consuming, like scheduling.
Very time consuming.
Yeah. So if you're not just a business owner, but like if you're an executive at a company, or you are part of a company and you have executives and you see someone struggling to keep up, it's because they're doing that admin time, and just like a simple breakdown, like 10 hours a week, right? If you spend 10 hours a week managing emails and calendaring and scheduling alone can take 10 hours a week. I've definitely been in situations where I've spent more time than necessary on getting something on the calendar if you're doing complex scheduling.
Yeah,
So your
very
time,
easily.
yeah, say your time is worth $200 an hour, which for an executive is a very low amount.
Hmm.
I mean, for an attorney, that is a very low amount. They are much higher than the $200 an hour, but let's just keep it at that for like a round number. So 10 hours a week at $200 an hour, that's $2,000 in lost value, in time that you could be billing your clients for your own work, or, doing something that's moving the business forward, that's strategic, that needs your expertise. But instead, you're burning your time scheduling calls, not even having the calls. It just takes you 10 hours to get them scheduled.
Exactly, exactly. And then the other thing that I think our business owners and execs get is, because you're getting a strategic partner, is you're
Mhm.
getting that person that's going to sit down and say, maybe today is not the day that you take those 5 calls.
Right,
Maybe today is the day that you say, I'll take 2.
right.
And then the other part of the day, I should focus strategically on my business, whether that's, trying to build out, a plan for calls the next week, or work on a podcast, or work on something that you're passionate about as a business owner. You get that resource that's going to be there to be like, okay, here's how I can help you be more efficient with your time, have healthier boundaries, and feel
Mhm.
less burned out too.
The healthier boundaries. Yep. Yep. You don't need to schedule 5 calls in one day. All right.
Exactly.
So let's talk about, we've talked a lot about kind of that freelance, like DIY. So let's talk about what happens, um, the mistakes we see. Bobby, I've talked to hundreds of business owners over the last 5 years. And I mean, I could come up with a long laundry list of what goes wrong when people DIY their admins for it. Y'all, there's just some things you should not DIY.
Exactly, exactly. Well, I think sometimes we get excited because we feel like we have a need. We have a need, we need to hire.
Right. Like, this is so exciting. I've grown my business. Like, I'm finally at the place where, like, I have a need for this. I can actually justify hiring someone to help me and take some of the burden off of me. It's great. It's a great place to be as a business owner. It feels really, really good. But then it
Absolutely.
can turn bad quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And so we get so excited. But, again, we all live in the world where we get a little impulsive, and saying yes feels really good.
Mhm.
And so sometimes what we do is we say yes to the first person, the first candidate who walks through the door. And we're not really fully vetting that process out. We haven't had the conversation that's intentional, which is, what works for you? What works for me? How do I delegate? How do I deal with feedback? How do I handle communication? And that's
Yeah.
one of the things that I think leads to a breakdown in any, I mean, and I've seen it dozens of times in any employer-employee relationship, is that lack of communication. Sometimes there are days where I know direct feedback is not going to hit me right. It's just not going to land for me well. And then there are days where, okay, we can just deal with the facts and move on. But somebody has to know that about my communication style to be an effective leader for me.
Mhm.
And if we can't have that conversation up front because we're so excited about the yes, then we've
Mhm.
missed the boat entirely on the communication. And at some point, that is going to lead to a communication breakdown. And
Mhm.
what happens is then there's a culture that happens where people are not willing to come forward. They're not willing to honestly state things because they're worried about how it will be perceived. And that's one of the things that we're very intentional about at Lyft is, okay, what works for you? How do you delegate? How do we make this path smooth for you?
Well, and also, I mean, before we even get there, is hiring properly.
Hmm.
You're excited, you need somebody on your team. You hire your neighbor sister's dog walker for $20 an hour. You have no idea how to delegate. You have no idea how to give feedback. They're a contractor. You can't request a lot out of them. They're trying to freelance and do 45 different jobs. All of the things we've kind of talked about, through some of the cons of hiring admin support in these different ways. And you lose them. You don't keep them. There's no retention. So you've just spent 3 months of your time training someone, and then they're gone. And then you have to start over again because you were excited, you didn't have a process to hire, you weren't properly vetting the people, and you weren't providing them the employment structure that they need, right? Like, people stay with us a long time because we're paying them as employees, we're taking part of their tax burden, we're giving them health insurance and paid time off and treating them like humans when something goes wrong in life, not burning them out and those types of things. So I think yeah, that's
Exactly.
that's how we do it differently. And I'm not saying that everybody DIY in their admin support is doing that. I've met people who have hired, somebody they know who needed a position, and it's been a great relationship. Some people are better leaders than others.
Well, exactly, exactly. And there's the lack of retention that exists, I think is a concern for a lot of employers because employees have reached a place where, post-COVID, we are all looking to land and feel as though we're in a place that is the best benefits and the best structure, and we're treated the most human.
Mhm.
And so, in order to retain folks, you have to really have your A game on as an employer now.
Yep.
You don't really have the option of not having your A game on because that employee is going to find the bigger, better deal.
I keep on saying, Bobby, it's a seller's market.
Yeah,
It's a seller's
exactly.
market. If you want skilled support and you want someone who's going to want to work, like, you have to give them a reason to want to work. And a lot of that is real simple. Balance, not calling them on the weekends, making sure they have the things they need, having empathy when things go wrong, somebody dies, their kid gets sick, like, just a little bit of empathy will help retain somebody for a while. We are digressing though, and we could go off on that forever.
Mhm.
So we've been chatting now for a little bit over 30 minutes, and let's just go real quick about how, if somebody wanted to work with us, how would they find us?
So there are many, many ways to find us. And one of the best things to do is go to our website, liftbusinessresources.com. One of the things that we've got is a really detailed breakdown of how we can support. Now, really detailed breakdown, lots of words. Let's take that lift off of you too. Let's
Yeah.
schedule a discovery call. It costs you nothing, nothing to sit down with Katie and I, and we'll sit down and say, okay, for this half hour, tell me all of your pain points. Tell me all of the reasons that things are not perfect. Tell me what we could do to help. And, sometimes we come away from these calls and we're like, there are some things that you can do, but there are things that you can do. You don't necessarily need us.
Yeah, we're going to tell you if we can help and if we can't help. We'll tell you both ways.
Yeah, and then sometimes we come away from these calls and we have more ideas than you had.
Yep.
And we have ways that make things so much easier
Yep.
and so much more peaceful for you and calm your chaos.
Yep. Bobby, what's your email address?
It is Bobby@liftbusinessresources.com.
And that is Bobby with a Y, which
Yep,
most
by the
people
way.
respect. Bobby with a Y at liftbusinessresources.com. You can check us out on liftbusinessresources.com to schedule. There's a little schedule a call button. You're either going to get me or Bobby. And you can find us both on LinkedIn, Katie Santoro and Bobby Gibson. So thanks for tuning in to Lift the Gate with Lift Business Resources. If you're spending your days buried in $20 an hour tasks, it might be time to ask, what is it really costing you? Not just money-wise, but also energetically. Another very important, valuable resource. If you're ready to explore smarter, scalable support, check out liftbusinessresources.com or to book a call with us, like we just talked about. We'll help you find the support that you need so that you can stay focused on what matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with fellow business owners who might be stuck in the admin weeds. Until next time, keep lifting the gate.